in
I will thank everybody for attending today's meeting. Generally, Dr. Wheeler, so you're aware, generally we have our annual fossil fair on this Saturday in November, but because of the current situation with the COVID-19 virus, we decided to cancel it about 6 to 8 weeks ago when we were at the height of the Delta surge. So this is the replacement for that, and we're delighted to be able to have a topic today that's of such general interest. I mean, fossilized wood and petrified wood can be collected at hundreds, if not thousands, of sites in the United States. I know that there are people who try to have a collection and get a piece of fossilized wood from every state. I'm far from there, but I do always look for fossilized wood when I'm out in my hunts. So without further ado, I will gladly welcome you to talk to us today about hardwoods. And you are at North Carolina State University here locally.
Yes.
So we are glad to have you, and we hope that maybe we can see you up close and personal someday.
That would be nice. Okay. So if I click on share screen, I should be good to go. And I want to do this one. Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there
Can
we
you
go.
put it in presentation mode? We still see the.
Okay, I'm in. I see you guys on the whole. Maybe if I'm going to reduce, I can see it fine, and I am in. I'm in full screen mode for the PowerPoint. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, we just see the small slides on the left, but.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Let me see if I can close out everything else. Hold it. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Okay, so it should be. That's strange because on my computer, I see everything just fine.
It has to do with how the person sets their own computer. You can see people if you want to, but you can minimize them if you don't want to. So it's nothing you can change.
Oh, okay.
So just go ahead. This fine.
Because can you all see? So what are you seeing other than the first slide?
If you go to view, you can minimize the people if you want to.
Yeah. I've done that.
No, not you. I'm telling the other people because they have to do it too.
Okay. Yeah, because if you go up on the right-hand side and click on the minus sign, you should end up losing. I hope you can see the full screen. Jim, can you see the full screen?
What I'm seeing is the edit version of.
Oh, that's not good. Let me see if I'm going to have to. I think what I'll need to do is do a stop video. I need to exit somehow.
Take it out. The only thing I don't know.
I think you just need to start the slideshow.
Yeah, start the slideshow.
I have. Well, on my computer, I have.
Oh, I see. So it should be.
Let me just help crap. And for some reason, I can't get out of the darn thing.
Just to reassure you, it is completely legible. We are able. It's not.
We're able to see it.
It's not small. We are able to see it.
Okay, but now I'm not able to control.
Oh, well, that's worse.
Which is not a good thing. Okay, well, I'm not okay. Anyway, I can see my slides. Oh, I'm sorry. I knew I should have tried the whole thing earlier. But basically what I'm going to do is take you through a tour of some fossil wood sites that are associated with national parks and monuments. And one of the reasons that one is interested in studying fossil wood, at least I am, is that you can use it for reconstructing ancient environments and climate change. And some of the sites, well, you talk about charismatic megafauna, when you're talking about T-Rex and all of the big dinosaurs, there is such a thing as charismatic megaflora, like this log here in a petrified forest in Thailand, which is probably going to make its way into the Guinness World Book of Records as the world's longest petrified wood. This thing is longer than any of the logs in the Arizona petrified forest. And the thing that's fun about it is this is actually a legume log type that looks like what grows in the surrounding forest of Southeast Asia.
Excuse me, Elizabeth, are you on your second slide?
Yes, I am, and I
Well,
can't, okay.
That's not what we're seeing.
No, all we're seeing is the title slide.
Okay, let me try this stuff again. Okay, I'm just gonna see what I've got showing up. Go back to my, that is so bizarre. Okay, the only thing I have open right now is Zoom. Let me go to my PowerPoint. I apologize for not getting on really early and checking it out to make sure things were going to work.
Okay.
Okay, now let's try this again.
Oh,
All right. Now I'm going to hit the presentation mode with the slide. I'm going to hit slideshow.
okay.
Oops, no, it's not letting me cut that. I need to open. Okay, I've got to. Okay, you're going to probably have to let me back in. Okay, now if I hit share screen, we'll try this again. I don't want desktop one, I want this. Can you see the whole?
Yeah, we see all your slides, the selection page.
Okay, so now I'm just gonna hit the screen. How does that work?
Yeah, we're not.
Go up to where it says slideshow and start slideshow. There's a little
I've done
command.
that already. I did that already in PowerPoint.
It's not doing that for us.
Okay, then let's try this one more time. I'm going to leave meeting. Okay. Now I'm going to hit share again and hope for the best. Share screen. Okay. I'm hitting play from start. Did that work? Okay, I really don't know what to do. I'm so sorry. Because I'm going to do a resume share again, because it's,
What if you click on presenter view, which is to the right of the play from start button on your computer?
that's what I was doing before.
Oh.
You probably can't see what I've got. Get out of this again, leave meeting.
Presenter view usually will show more than one slide. I think she doesn't want to click that. I may want to unclick that.
Yeah, and I'm not positive, but I think when you're using PowerPoint and then you do a share, you have to share the slideshow, not share PowerPoint. I think the computer system has two different applications, and she's sharing PowerPoint, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. Now the only thing we see is the slideshow.
Oh my God. Okay, yes, and I got it with the meeting. Okay, let's try this again. Well, that was a nice, yeah, good. Sorry, 10, okay, background. So I'm gonna speed this up. So gonna go, this is sort of the outline of what I hope to do, although if it doesn't make sense, stop me. If you can, I think, use that little raise hand thingy. Okay, so I'm going to go through the basics of what reasons to study fossil wood, how it becomes petrified. The main problem I have is, if you're interested in what is it, this is a whole another problem in terms of once you get its age, then you have to figure out what it is. And I have as we've already mentioned, I have a prejudice against conifers or softwoods because they're really difficult to work with. So I'm getting rid of you guys. And it was nice for me because this gave me an opportunity to revisit some of my favorite places on the planet, because in addition to being preserved for their protected for their spectacular landscapes, these 4 places really have some fabulous collections of fossil wood that can give information about past climates and whatnot. Oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, I gotta find my arrow on here. Oh, no. Oh, wouldn't you know it? There we go. So why study fossil wood? You saw this one before, because some of it is just plain spectacular. I think that's why we're sort of intrigued by it. If you want to think about ancient landscapes, if you find something like this, you know that there were trees around. It also can use wood for reconstructing past environments and tracking climate change. If you're a botanist or just plain interested in natural history, fossil woods are another source of information about past biodiversity and history of different plant groups. And it's a public service because if you figure out what a wood is, this provides information that can be used in displays at national and state parks and national monuments. Sometimes wood is the only thing that's found at a site. For instance, the Western desert of Egypt and Northern Africa in general has some important vertebrate sites, but as you can imagine, you don't find many leaf fossils here. So your only source of information is to figure out what the woods are, which turn out to be a legume that's definitely not something that could grow in this area today. As a side story, some of the oldest paved roads in the world were in ancient Egypt, and the paving stones were petrified wood from the Fayum, which is kind of a neat thing. Fossil wood can be used, as for building material, just as a nice thing to have in your house, as a polished thing. And there are certain wood features that correlate with certain climates. For instance, if something is from the lowland rainforest, these things are designed for moving water, and they don't have to worry about, there's not as much problem with drought. They tend to have lack growth rings or have indistinct growth rings. So the wood in number 1 is something that would be associated with a tropical climate. Wood in number 2 and occurs in desert plants and cold temperate plants, where all those little white circles, openings there, are water conducting cells, vessels. And you see, compared to wood 1, there's many of them, so there's a lot of backup system, and these are less likely to lose the ability to conduct water. Vines are especially intriguing because they come with humongous water conducting cells. And if you look at a cross section of a vine, just from an isolated piece of wood, you can tell that it's a vine because almost the whole cross section view of it is nothing but vessels. And you get over here to 4, those guys that have distinct growth rings, every growth ring consists of a band of wide open vessels, and then a late wood zone formed afterwards that has narrow vessels. And the woods that you see in 4 only occur in seasonal climates and are found in plants that drop their leaves. So you can sort of track climate using when these particular strategies came into existence. One of the reasons that wood is an abundant fossil, we know because humanity has used wood as a building material for time immemorial, and it is relatively resistant decay. So which this means that it's around, has a good chance of entering the fossil record. The other thing that gives it an advantage for entering the fossil record is that most of wood is made up of hollow pipe-like cells. Here we're looking at a magnified view of a conifer softwood. Each one of those squares represents a single cell, and then they go downward. And these openings, little pores here, are the connections between the cells for moving water upwards. So when you've got it like that, it means that when wood has a natural affinity for silica, and in fact, some trees native to the tropics are sort of pre-silicified because the cell wall has such an attraction for silica, it binds to it. And this is one of the reasons that you have a lot of fossil wood in the Western US where there's been so much mountain building and volcanic eruption. So there's a really good source of silica for producing fossil wood. This goes into the sort of wood that I try to find, looks like this top picture here, which is nice and black, which indicates there's original cell wall material in there. Now, while the Arizona petrified woods from the Chinle Formation are beautiful in terms of color and certainly fascinating, these guys have lousy detail in them because the crystallization of the silica in the wood has sort of just mussed up everything inside it, so you can't see good details, which is sort of nice for me because it means when I go looking for wood, I'm not competing with people that are looking for nice woods to display in their collections. I want this stuff, which is kind of black, rather than the pretty woods. Certainly, the one other thing, if you want to reconstruct ancient vegetation, what you have to deal with is answering this question of what is it? And that isn't generally a problem. I mean, as I say, I stick with hardwoods because they're easier to figure out what they might be, more so than the softwoods. But there's very few woods you can identify just by looking at them with your naked eye or with a hand lens. Oaks are easy to get because they have a very distinctive wood anatomy. You can see you've got big vessels, openings in the early wood, tiny vessels in the late wood, and the growth rings are very, very distinct, plus which you've got these stripes running vertically or the rays, and they are very wide in the oaks. But if you found red maple and birch as petrified wood, when you look at these and from end view, they look very, very similar, and you really have to get other information to tell them one from the other. So you need to do a bit more than just look at end views for most woods. The deal is that most wood cells have a longitudinal orientation, because we're talking about moving water up the tree and also coming up with a structure that's flexible and strong. So when you look at wood inside, there's the conifers are quite different than the angiosperms, the hardwoods. Angiosperms generally almost always have at least two size classes of openings in them. The vessels, which are the open, wide, move water up the tree things, while the conifers just have a bunch of, essentially gluing a bunch of straws together is what gives you a conifer or softwood. So you really need to have different views to figure out what it is. Going back to using oak as an example, which is easy to recognize, you've got rays in them, and the rays in hardwoods usually are wider than the rays in softwoods. So this shows you the detail of there is a water conducting vessel, which you can see is a hollow tube. And in oaks, these tubes are oftentimes aggregations of cells stuck together one on top of the other, sometimes making a tube that's as long as the tree is high, which is really a remarkable achievement. And that's why if you measure the speed of water going up a tree, you'll find that it's much faster in the hardwoods than it is in the softwoods. And again, here's another reason why this would, if you looked at it or tried to figure out what it was based on your knowledge of Eastern North America trees, you'd think that it was a elm, because elms have these late wood pretty wavy tangential bands of vessel groupings in them. But when you look at it in the other views, you'd find out it's not an elm, it's in a different family, the Araliaceae. But in other words, you need to look at not just the cross section, but also this view, which is a longitudinal cut made perpendicular to the rays, as well as this view, the radial view, which is the one that if you're splitting logs for firewood, you're splitting down along the weak spot, which is the intersection between the rays and the rest of the wood. Okay, one of the things that kept me kind of sane during our shutdown, and I'm still doing it, is that way back when, if you want to identify petrified wood in North America or anywhere, one of the things that is a problem, you may find a fossil wood in Oregon or in North Carolina, but the likelihood that it's related to something that now grows in the area varies depending on how old the wood is. So you need, if you're searching for relationships to present day plants, you need to search through essentially worldwide, because there are woods out in Eastern Oregon that are related to woods that today only occur in Africa. Or we know that we've got woods that are in Eastern US and in Eastern Asia, but they also occurred in Western US way back when. So one of the projects I've been fortunate with is working with the NC State Library. We got a grant to put up a website devoted to wood anatomy, and it has in it a number of descriptions of wood, and has a key that you can use if you're ever interested in just looking at, if you've got a favorite tree and you want to know what the insides of it look, you can just go here and search for keyword, say maple, if you want, or look at images of birch, or look at, just sort of try to identify, if you get into doing wood anatomy, it's a good place to go. But sort of as of yesterday afternoon, and it will be, the numbers will change tomorrow. We've got a database that has over 7,500 descriptions and 54,000 images of present day hardwoods. And for fossil hardwoods, a smaller number, but which is still okay. Softwoods, modern, again, there's fewer softwoods that are alive that exist than there are of hardwoods. So this is sort of an ongoing project. Every morning I do more than I'm better at flossing this database than I am about flossing my teeth. So every day it involves doing something to improve the content of the database. A constant problem, which is always has been a frustration, and I mean, it's true for anybody who wants to identify wood and you don't know where it came from. There aren't any, when you start out to identify wood, you don't know if you'll be able to get it there. And some families, like the legumes, the bean family, I mean, it's kind of like good luck if you can get it to a genus. Elm family, you can generally get it to a genus, and sometimes to species. But for the most part, once you start, you have no idea of where you're going to end up or if you can figure out what it is. So it's hard to know when is it good enough in terms of what you're trying to find out. One of my absolute favorite places on the planet, and I wish I had learned about it when I was younger, is Big Bend National Park, which has late Cretaceous through early Tertiary, post-Cretaceous extinction floras and faunas there. And it really is quite spectacular. This is where I've had the good fortune to work with Tom Lehman, who has mapped the geologic formations in the park and taught at Texas Tech for years and has worked on dinosaur vertebrate remains for ages. And it's just sort of, if you put me down in Big Bend, I wouldn't know where to go, but I will follow happily in Tom's footsteps. And it's nice because he's what you call a polymath in terms that he's interested not just in the vertebrates, but in what they lived with and what their environment was, which makes sense. So was a wonderful colleague. In terms of the Park Service refers to Big Bend as a paleontological paradise because you've got all of these spectacular vertebrate remains. However, if you notice down here, there's not just, this landscape is littered with parts of fossil logs. And I tend to think of it as also a paradise for what we call the paleoxylotomists, those of us who study fossil wood. And Tom has mapped all the locations where you find conifers and where you find hardwoods or the dicots in Big Bend. And you can see from the dots, there's a nice sequence with many localities, and there's more out there to be worked on. When you start in on them, this is what you find at the lowest level where you're into coastal marshes and swamps, because Big Bend was at the western edge of the Cretaceous sea that went up the middle of North America. Preservation at this level isn't so great, but you can see, you might recognize this as a palm because of all the nice little bundles in there. There's a boring conifer here, and then this thing is actually related to the Malvaceae, which is today mostly a tropical family. You move up section, and again, what's neat, you find some nicely preserved woods. Again, have no idea what they are, but they're nicely preserved. And there are some palms. And this one is an interesting one because we've got palm stems, we've got palm leaves, which are assigned to Sabellites, and there's palm seeds of the sable palm palmetto. And the thing that's Tom pointed out that's particularly interesting is that where you find the palm seeds, you also find little bone beds of juvenile herbivorous dinosaurs. So this is a case where you can't help but wonder if these were a food source for the baby dinosaurs, mostly horned dinosaurs. So it's a neat thing. Also notice you're not seeing any growth ring boundaries in these woods. Moving up, here I am in my happy place, sitting on a hillside with a freshly collected piece of fossil wood. And at this level, you've got a number of logs, and all of them inside, there's two types that occur here, have either this anatomy, which it looks like what you find in another tropical family. Again, no distinct growth rings, or they look like this. Again, no distinct growth rings, and again, probably related to a tropical family. But these are good sized logs, as you can see. What's particularly nice about that type is there are at least 2 localities where stumps of this type of wood occur in place. So you can actually map out the spacing of the trees and fit in cute little hadrosaurs and ceratopsians to go with it, which is kind of cool. And this particular wood occurs in New Mexico and Mexico as well. So it's sort of like this was kind of the dominant tree in the late Cretaceous of the Southwest US. And this one again, this was late in the day, and it was one of those cases where we were really getting worn out. And Tom made the comment, I think I remember there was a log up this gully. So we traipsed along following Tom, and lo and behold, found this, which turned out to again have nice preservation. Again, no distinct growth rings in it. And again, seems to be related to a tropical family, although not like any modern member of the family. So again, what we end up with is being able, what's neat here is that Tom, who worked his way through college by selling his paintings, is really great at reconstructions. And so what he did was put together the associations of plants and dinosaurs, vertebrates through time. So you can see the kind of association, and this actually should make it up and be written up as a separate small publication to be handed out at the park, because I think what he's done here is just remarkable. So I provide, these are the kinds of woods inside. Tom provides the reconstructions and who lived where with whom, as well as being able to put them in context in terms of age and geology. And this guy, the other thing that's really intriguing is from an anatomical sense, and also just sort of a tree behavior sense. These trees at Big Bend are loaded up with storage cells, like all of these little circular cells in here are parts of rays, and they account for over half of the wood, which makes one wonder if they're tree succulents or, what the heck is going on, because it could be useful in storage of food. I mean, and if you live in a landscape where you have herds of small, essentially equivalent of small tanks running into you, you may need to be able to replace foliage, respond to damage. But whether or not this has anything to do with living in a landscape with large herbivores is an interesting thing to contemplate. So Big Bend has hardwoods without distinct growth rings. Some are related to families that occur today in the tropics. This is not a tropical landscape today. And there's a number of do not know oxalons there. We'll now move into the Eocene, and again to another spectacular locale for fossil woods, and that would be Yellowstone. We know Yellowstone has gorgeous scenery, and back when they were trying to get legislation through to turn it into a national park, there were some spectacular renderings of the park that were produced and sent back east to influence legislators to do this. And there are 3 localities in Yellowstone that are amazing in that you actually have mountainsides that are like layer cakes of fossil forest. The earliest description of these was in 1878 when this diagram was made showing at least 27 layers of fossil forest at a place called Amethyst Mountain. And also the same situation occurs at what Specimen Ridge, and again to the east, the eastern part of the park in the Gallatin Range, where you find layers of fossil wood. And one thing that is fun to do is to just browse through the national parks photo collection as well as the USGS's collection to find some historical pictures. One of the nicest things written about the fossil forest, and again, this is part of the campaign to turn it into a national park, John Muir, who worked closely with Theodore Roosevelt and other naturalists, described Amethyst Mountain, which is one of these layer cakes of fossil forest, as beneath the living trees, the edges of petrified forest are exposed to view like specimens on the shelves of a museum, standing on ledges tier above tier where they grew solemnly silent in rigid crystalline beauty after swaying in the winds thousands of years ago, opening marvelous views back into the years and climates and life of the past time, which is, we don't get to write that way anymore. But again, it certainly was an appeal for making this place protected. Studies of the fossil woods began in the late 1800s, and primarily with Germans who studied the woods. The earliest American rendering or description was by Frank Hall Knowlton, who did a monograph on the fossil flora of the Yellowstone National Park, mainly about leaves, but he also included some work on the woods. This shows you some of the original photographs from the expedition in the late 1800s. And these are photographs taken from his monograph. Later on, he wrote up a general description of them, saying that fully 95% of the trunks belong to these species. So mainly it was conifers or softwoods that are there, but he also noted that there were some hardwoods there as well. This is one of the hardwoods that he mentioned. Again, from a wood anatomy standpoint, just beautiful preservation in terms of cell detail. And his name for it, Lauranoxylon pulchrum, meant beautiful laurel tree or beautiful laurel wood, the oxylon ending referring to wood. One problem, it's not really a problem, it's actually not in the laurel family, it's a legume. And there are at Yellowstone some other beautifully preserved legume woods. A cute story related to what of the woods that occur at Yellowstone is that Jim Bridger, one of the mountain men who was traipsing around that area of the world way back when, recounted this tale. I looked up the petrified tree and out a petrified limb, saw a petrified bird singing a petrified song, sticking out his mouth about 10 petrified feet. And this is the relevant part. Looking down, I saw that the ground was covered with petrified balls like sycamore balls, and from these a considerable forest was growing up. Well, it just so happens that Jim Bridger must have known a little wood identification, because one of the most common woods on Specimen Ridge is a sycamore. So that sort of fits in. Also common on Specimen Ridge and Amethyst Mountain is this wood type, which is a live oak wood type. Growth rings are there, but they're not ring porous like is associated with very temperate, very highly seasonal climates. Here's the list of what we found at Yellowstone so far. And if you just scan through it, you'll see that it's either, for the most part, genera that are related to trees that grow in the eastern US or eastern Asia. So we're getting into the time when things are becoming more recognizable and you can actually figure out, well, in general, you can figure out what family they are. However, okay, published the first paper on the Yellowstone woods in 1977, and the second part published in 1978. And in that part, which was published now, we're talking more than 40 years ago, mentioned that there would be a part 3, which I am still working on. There's at least 12 more types in the US Geological Survey's collections, which I photographed. They're nicely preserved, but they're mostly in the I do not know oxalon group, which means I've tried for decades, but I still cannot figure out what these things are. So we'll move now up in time to 44 million years ago, where you can see that the climate now by oxygen isotope measurements has declined considerably from the 15 million years ago of Yellowstone. And we're going to go to the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument, which is in Central Oregon, which has both fruits and seeds as well as woods. And it's the single most diverse locality for fossil woods anywhere on the planet. Again, there we find sycamore-like woods, and we also find some woods that look like they're more tropical, where you have wide water conducting cells and no obvious growth ring boundaries in them. So subtropical to tropical. You also have some beautifully preserved magnolias, but the magnolias at the Central Oregon site don't look like the species we find here in the Eastern US. They're more like the species that occur in Eastern Asia. And this is common for many fossil plant localities in the Western US. They look like they have relationships with Asian species. If you're willing to do it, and it's actually not a bad hike, there are places where, in addition to the small woods, which are very abundant at the nut bed, what's called the Clarnell nut beds, there is a trail that you can take to look at some of the trees that are embedded in the cliffs at the fossil beds. This is what's called the Hancock tree, which is featured in exhibits in the visitor center, and which you can view it and its cousins out on the trail. This wood has reasonable anatomy. It's not as pretty as some of them, but it looks like a member of the witch hazel family, but it's what witch hazel family that occurs in Eastern Asia. Also very distinctive there is that you've got this pretty wood here on the right, which is spot on for a fig. And believe me, obviously, the John Day fossil beds do not have a climate conducive to growing figs these days. Our final short stop will be at the fluorescent fossil beds in Oregon, Colorado, which is west of Colorado Springs. And this is dated at 34 million years ago. And it's right here where things have done a significant dip and climates are becoming more seasonal. And what occurs there fits with that change in climate that's shown by the oxygen isotopes. You've got some hardwoods there, but what fluorescent is noted for, it's got these absolutely spectacular ancient sequoia stumps, some of which are, again, I think while that Thailand trunk is the longest, these guys are the widest. They're, just spectacular. They're accompanied not by tropical hardwood types, but by very seasonal types. You've got a Chinese elm, you've got a black locust, you've got a golden rain tree, all of which have distinct growth rings and are ring porous. So that concludes our tour. And we will now go back to going some of the reasons why you study fossil wood. If you do web searches, you'll find out that fossil wood is nice because it helps you develop a love of earth and nature. It brings patience. It creates a sense of agelessness and calms anxiety and fears about survival, which I found it very comforting for the past year and a half or more to handle fossil wood while we were in shutdown. And it helps relieve ailments and minor ills in old and cranky animals, which also includes humans in my case, assists in the removal of worries caused by petty annoyances, and keeping a piece of petrified wood with you at work is a good way to prevent working stress. One good friend, colleague, pointed out that this was probably because petrified wood makes a good projectile, and you can throw it at people who come into your office with annoying questions or to bother you. So this concludes our tour of some national park and national monument petrified woods. And if you want to go see the John Day fossil beds, you would probably want to make sure that you pass through the town of Fossil, Oregon on your way to do so. Thank you.
That was marvelous. Thank you so much, Dr. Wheeler. I think that I would have to say that not just fossilized wood provides great relief from stress and anxiety, but all kinds of fossils do. I myself found it to be a really wonderful thing to do during the past 24 months or so. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Wheeler? None at all.
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
are the fluorescent beds still open for collecting?
No, but what I mean, to collect there, essentially, you can't collect in any of these places I've mentioned without a permit. However, there is directly outside of the monument, there is a ranch that allows you to come in and collect, and they've got the same kind of stuff outside of the park that's inside, and
Right.
school groups come there to collect. And it's kind of neat because one kid, one of the latest school trips, they found a bird. I mean, while you can collect wood there's all sorts, like fluorescent is also where the world's best supply of fossil insects or butterflies occur. So this kid found, I think they found a bat and also a bird. So yes, you can collect outside of the park, and it really, it's a good thing that you can. But yeah, I mean, essentially, if you drive around the West, there's tons of places literally that'll sell you fossil wood.
Yeah.
I see a hand up. I don't know if I can.
Joy.
Yes, I do have a question, and that is, some of us are making donations to the most appropriate place. Could you recommend a place for donations of exceptional fossilized wood?
Oh, the North Carolina Museum would be a place, and also the Smithsonian.
Okay.
Essentially, but in all cases, they'll want to know. I know with the Denver Museum and other places, they need to have documentation that you had permission to collect it, because they want to make sure that it's been collected legally and that they can figure out what geologic formation it might have come from. Because I know there was someone who wanted to make donations to the Denver Museum, and they said no thank you, because the guy who picked it up didn't have permission from the rancher to go on his land, or didn't have documentation that he had permission. So that was, that donation was declined.
There's not a repository at North Carolina State or a display or,
No. No,
okay,
no, we don't have anything like that.
okay.
Yeah, Eli, you don't have